I'm Jennifer Caniglio with CCBJ, and we're excited for today's webcast, Adopting Generative AI Technologies in Corporate Legal Departments, Benefits, Risks, Use Cases, and Getting Started. Our distinguished speakers are Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, TracyAnn Eggen, eDiscovery and legal technology expert, and Joy Holley, legal operations consultant for Vertex Advisors. Full biographical information on each speaker, including LinkedIn profiles, are available in your console on the Speaker Bios widget. We encourage you to ask questions as well as fill out the survey with your feedback at the end. And if you're interested in the presentation or additional resources, you may download it using the materials download icon. And all of these icons are at the bottom of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to pass it off to Doug. Doug?
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome everybody to the webinar Generative AI in Corporate Legal Departments. Over the next hour, we'll discuss various considerations for generative AI, which has become the elephant in the room that corporate legal and organizations in general must address in today's legal tech environment. Of course, let's start by introducing today's terrific panel, starting with two of the most knowledgeable legal tech professionals I know, who've been responsible for addressing numerous legal tech challenges from a corporate perspective. I'll start with TA. TA Eggen is a legal expert with over 25 years of experience specializing in intellectual property litigation. TA is a highly skilled and technically savvy leader who takes a data-driven approach to her work. In her previous role, she successfully managed day-to-day operations at a major healthcare organization. TA is dedicated to providing cutting-edge tech stacks and evaluating people, process, and technology to deliver success. She's currently the president of ACED's San Francisco chapter and a member of EDRM's Global Advisory Council. Joy Holley is a licensed attorney who has served as director of eDiscovery Services and practice support at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner and director of legal operations at Edward Jones. She's a legal operations consultant with years of experience and has written about the topics we'll be discussing today. And I'm Doug Austin, and I'm your eDiscovery point guard for today's webinar. I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, which is a daily blog about eDiscovery information governance, cybersecurity, data privacy, and of course, AI trends, best practices, and case law. I've been in the industry over 30 years, so I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And I've been daily blogging for over 13 years now, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. And here's the agenda. And we'll start by discussing a couple of considerations for generative AI to set the stage. Then we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of generative AI with a discussion of its benefits, risks and challenges, use cases that corporate legal departments can evaluate today and tomorrow, and considerations for getting started. We also have an extensive resources section, which constitutes 10 slides of links to useful information that you can check out on your own. So as Jennifer mentioned, you can download the slide deck, and we encourage you to do so to check those out. And finally, we do welcome questions. And so if you have questions, please put those questions in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. By the way, if you remember the graphic that you saw on the initial slide, that was generated by OpenAI's DALL-E, which you can access for free via the link in the lower right if you're a Microsoft user. Of course, any ideas expressed by us here today are our own, not those of our organizations, clients, or partners. We would be artificially intelligent if we forgot to mention that. Also, none of what we say should be considered legal advice. It's best practices, advice, and considerations. So please keep that in mind. So with that, let's get started. One more time with the animations here. There's supposed to be animations. There we go. Hit the right button. That always helps, right? So one of our biggest challenges associated with AI, and particularly generative AI, is understanding it in all its various forms, implementations, and challenges that have to be addressed when looking to leverage it. So you see here a few terms to know. I'm sure several of which you've undoubtedly heard quite a bit about over the past few months. And there's a link at the bottom of the slide with definitions to these and other AI-related terms. So Joy, as we can see here, there are a lot of terms and technologies here that relate to AI and generative AI. And it can be difficult to understand it all. So what recommendations do you have for our audience to develop an understanding of AI and Gen AI that's good enough to address considerations about it?
Thanks, Doug, and good afternoon. That's a great question you pose, and there's a deluge of information, obviously, coming from many different sources, so it's important that we focus on what's significant and trustworthy. For the foundational information, webinars like this are actually a great starting point to provide an overview. Corporate legal departments obviously have broad power across the organization, and they need to understand AI on at least two different levels. So first, they have to understand the regulatory and business impacts for the industries in the legal department that the legal department supports within the enterprise. So whether that be technology, a bank, medical services, pharmaceutical company. I set alerts for AI-related content in industry journals and broader business publications that I already read to feed me timely information about these topics on a regular basis. Second, lawyers obviously need to be educated on the ethical rules that govern the legal profession. We'll talk more about that later, but there are a number of great sources that examine the impact of AI on the law in different contexts. The ABA recently formed an AI task force that we'll talk about in more detail later, but that I expect to provide broad and comprehensive insights on these issues and their practice in our profession. On LinkedIn, there's a number of influencers that I follow who talk about these issues regularly. Doug, you're certainly one of them. ALM is a specialized business news source that reports on AI issues across industries with a legal lens. There are also several federal courts that have issued judicial standing orders on these issues, on the use of AI in federal court, and we'll talk about those in more detail later. But the takeaway is that lawyers, as with every other issue, have to learn to see the forest and the trees and look at these issues with a lot of different lenses.
Yeah, great citation of sources there, and certainly key to keep looking at sources out there to keep yourself educated. So TA, one of the things we've been hearing a lot about generative AI and applications like ChatGPT everywhere we go these days, but we don't hear as much about the term large language model, which is the foundation for Gen AI apps like ChatGPT. So what are LLMs and why are they important for legal professionals today?
Well, simply put, LLMs are just a data set of information that have some kind of code that when you type in some kind of queue, ones that we know in the legal field are going to be Westlaw and Lexis. For those eDiscovery and data-driven, evidence-driven type of people, we've been started off with summation and concordance. And those were finite data sets that we could basically use a certain search terminology, and then it would yield some type of results. As that has grown, the data has obviously grown. So when you're looking at large language models, you're really looking at whether or not you need to have subsets of those groups, so the searchability across them yield those results in a timely fashion. And I think what's going to be important for the legal professional today is data isn't going away. In fact, it's growing at such a volume that we don't know the best way all the time in the uses. And it makes it almost hard to search. Anybody who's basically been in their email and they're trying to find that one email and they kind of remember one or two things and they're trying to search across that, knows that it will punt up, results that weren't something that they were looking for. So for anybody in the legal technology space, it's going to be understanding how those models are built, what the maximum capacity and size happen to be, and how can you get to that information quickly when you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And data, the mention about data is a great segue to this slide. And let's face it, what does AI need to work? What does anything need to work for that matter? It's data. It needs data and it needs lots of it. This is the 2023 Internet Minute infographic created by eDiscovery Today and LTMG and published earlier this year, which reflects what happens in a typical minute on the internet. And that's everything from 241 million emails sent per minute to nearly 19 million text messages sent per minute to stats on Slack messages, Teams chats, photos created with smartphones, and more. And there's even a stat here with visits to the ChatGPT site, which reflects the number back in February. So that number today is probably a lot more than that now. You can find out more about the sources of these stats via the link in the lower right. And this represents examples of the data types that organizations are struggling with every day. And there are always new data types on the horizon to create additional challenges. So TA, with data being generated from so many sources and in so many forms, how does that complicate the use of that data by AI algorithms?
Well, you have to really look at like the linear text sort of. If you have email, if you have a document repository, those are standard things that process very easily and they're easy to search across a platform. When you're talking about any variants of chat or fragments of conversations, that's a more cryptic sort of an ability. So, and there's different processing guidelines for those. So I think you have to educate yourself on what are the best practices for each of those data sources. What are the sort of irregularities or exclusions or exceptions that are going to be thrown, because that means that data is not searchable. And then figure out the sizing of that. And chat right now, because of the advent of COVID and post-COVID, it is just a natural source that people have pivoted away from email, and it's very unstructured. And with that unstructured content, it doesn't lend itself to searching in the regular context. I think what's also important is that with those type of sources, you have to review a lot more information in order to understand the cadence and sentimentality and the intent behind the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned processing guidelines, and that's a great point because it's not just that the data is there, but the format it's in, that in terms of how it's made usable. So by the way, somebody mentioned the link on the slide for the data sources doesn't work. I hope that means it works in the download, but if not, we will certainly get a fresh copy of the slides out to you, or send you the link, or I can put it up here while we're continuing on. So my apologies if that's the case. Joy, one of the things obviously that corporations deal with is data and the challenges associated with it. So how can corporate legal departments help get their respective organizations' data house in order?
Yeah, another great question, Doug. So in my experience, many legal departments are uniquely positioned to help identify the relevant data, some of which Tracy just talked about, and where it's stored for two reasons. First of all, legal departments' lawyers are already advising on the substantive issues within the business, and in that sense, dealing with the documents and the data in that substantive business context. They know the pitfalls and the pain points, for example, in the contracts that you may want to use in an AI exercise, because they help negotiate those. Also, I think the legal department since it's responsible for finding where different types of data is located for litigation or for transactional purposes, legal may know better, or more specifically, where certain data is located within the organization. So for any type of AI exercise, it's really first a knowledge management exercise, and you have to understand what data you want to use, what you want to leverage, where it is, and what condition it's in. Is it in a condition or format or structured and able to be useful and meaningful for AI purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, really, legal really kind of is a big driver of data throughout the organization, regardless what function, business unit we're talking about, right? Right, Joy?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of generative AI. And we'll start with the good, the benefits it can provide, which are many. And here are a few examples of those potential benefits for corporate legal departments that illustrate why literally everyone is talking about generative AI these days. It can do a lot of great things for organizations that have determined how to leverage its capabilities effectively. So let's talk about some of them. So Joy, I'll start with you. Obviously, knowledge management, you mentioned that. How can corporate legal departments leverage the knowledge management benefits of generative AI into automation and process improvement benefits?
Yeah, so for many organizations, early use cases are going to be how to accelerate processes that are already automated and how to further streamline processes to increase productivity. There's lots of opportunity here within legal. If your department has a legal operations team or function, this is the perfect opportunity for them to add value and demonstrate value. For example, how might AI be used to better evaluate outside counsel performance or legal spend or resource needs for intake requests for legal assistance from the business? Automation and process improvement exercises are also fantastic to demonstrate ROI and quantify specific value that the legal department is providing the business because it generates, again, data. We saved X dollars last year on outside counsel spend because we used AI to better understand engagement milestones and control the matter budgets. We were able to handle Y% more legal requests internally last year because we used AI to streamline the guardrails that salespeople use to negotiate contracts and how issues are escalated to legal. So as advisors to the business, counseling on early use cases implicating productivity might focus on how to streamline other repeatable processes like resolution of customer complaints, warranty claims through the use of real-time data. And having a hand in how technology is deployed and analyzing the outputs to make sure they're consistent with regulatory and policy considerations within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, one of the audience members said the link does work on the downloaded slides, so certainly make sure you download those and check that out. So, TA, we've talked about how generative AI can use an organization's data and help with knowledge management. But it's called generative AI for a reason. So how can the machine learning of a generative AI solution lead to people learning within a corporate legal department?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways. One, I think, if you have generative AI and you're a non-native speaker of whatever language, or you're working across international borders, the cadence of using that and having certain things prompted there can help you in sentimentality, how you're delivering a message, that sort of thing. I also think that we need real-time things that deal with investigations. Putting on an investigation hat or putting on a claims and litigation, it's like, what facilities have spikes that are consistent for the year? Are they on some type of policy, and is a certain is it number 12 of the policy that are causing problems? Is it a misunderstanding on the information? I think also we're going to be pivoting to this, and we're going to be talking about this, but the two biggest factors are risk mitigation and cost savings. And outside counsel is a big spend. So how do we mitigate and reduce that budget? We're going to be ranking the performance, where we are in the stage of the process. If we have 1,000 claims and law firm A, B, and C, and we rank that across the board, we see that law firm A is resolving those cases within the first 6 to 8 months, that they are only processing a certain amount of information and using it. I think also it can be used as an educational tool to see where people may need some professional development and growth, or where people are maximizing that. So you can leverage your internal resources to build and refine policies that may be more effective across the organization that are going to reduce that risk posturing. Because on a day-to-day basis, we just don't look at information that happens to do with that. And the contract space is just one of the solid tools, because of the textual base of using that, is to be able to say, these are the 3 clauses. And like Joy was saying, is put in triggers that every time this clause is revised, or if there's additions to that it gets triggered to a senior lawyer to review, all based on automation.
Right. Yeah. And automation and AI go hand in hand. And certainly we'll get into more depth on the use cases here in a couple of slides. But yeah, absolutely important considerations there. So, TA mentioned risk mitigation, and Joy, while Gen AI can create several risks within organizations, which we'll get to on the next slide here, it can also help with risk mitigation as well. So how else can organizations leverage Gen AI to mitigate corporate risks?
So as TA was just saying, broadly speaking, it has more robust capabilities to find information, including more obscure information, and to find it faster so you can mitigate more quickly, put that fire out while it's still small, so to speak. several different potential applications. In a manufacturing context, you might use it to identify warranty claims or warranty trends more quickly for remediation purposes. In a financial services context, having advisors absorb and synthesize, summarize large amounts of reporting data, analysis data, so that they can better advise investment clients. Within the legal department, for internal investigations. So an analyst can process transaction descriptions and customer documents into a Gen AI tool and ask it to identify or flag fraudulent transactions in real time, instead of kind of on a retrospective basis. For monitoring purposes, it might be used to find potentially problematic employee communications more quickly and in a more sophisticated way. In litigation, it can be used for quicker, more robust ECA to identify key information and witnesses quickly for your disclosure obligations or for responding to discovery. Also to more quickly understand an opposing party's production to you. And to help identify evidence that's likely to be used in a deposition, for example, of your 30B6 witness, or as a support for evidentiary support for a motion. So those are some of the examples of how you can mitigate.
Sure, that's great. Those are great examples. So one of the items on the list here is international operations, and certainly that's not probably one that would come top of mind for most folks. And obviously, TA, a lot of organizations are international these days, and there can be language barriers, you alluded to it before, that complicate corporate communication. So how can generative AI help address that challenge?
Yeah, I think that I think when you use generative AI, it's going to ease the person who's communicating with people in their organizations that they may not know, and streamline the actions that need to be taken from there. I think a lot of times people are hesitant to basically write something, especially if they're converting that or they're writing in a language that is not their primary communication. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that, there's a lot of privacy and security that are going on, and it's going to be across these channels. And if you put alerts like Joy was talking about, cybersecurity has a lot of these things. They have very sophisticated tools that already have alerts that are, washing all the borders, but also making sure that there isn't some communication going outside of your channel to either something internationally. And with the privacy regulations, those are constantly changing. And I wouldn't say that the normal user within an organization is very keen on that. So data security, improving relationships by using generative AI, I think, are going to be key takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the changes. I think we've had 7 states pass comprehensive data privacy laws this year. So it's continually changing, and certainly challenging in that regard. Question from the audience here: will future lawyers achieve the same level of expertise as seasoned professionals today if they have access to advanced Gen AI tools from the start of their careers? I'll open it up to the two of you. Thoughts on that question?
Well, I think that broadly speaking, law schools don't necessarily do a very good job across the board in preparing law students for practice when they start their careers. I think there is a lot of opportunity there to teach these types of technologies and their responsible use the same way we're taught about, regular legal research using Lexis, Westlaw, and traditional tools in law school. I think there are ways to advance and enhance law students and new lawyers' skill sets coming out of law school. And hopefully that's one way that this is used for good, right? To put us in a better starting place and to help us along that learning curve and shortening that learning curve that we all feel when we first start practice.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think you always have to be wary of the substitution between, independent thought and critical thinking, and then using technology as a leverage to to take care of some of the tasks or some of the other things. It also, as an educational tool in a ranking system, are your communications getting better, or are your briefs being written, and you have a fuller capacity on that. So I think law schools don't do a great job in technology in general, unless it's Westlaw or Lexis and they're looking for some kind of legal research. And I hope that in the future that will change.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've talked about plenty of times, is the law schools not addressing technology to the level that they could. Certainly one of the things that I think you're beginning to see some of these tools being tools that you can actually kind of get your hands on a bit, and I would encourage people to do that, if nothing else than to just get a sense of how they work and some of the issues and challenges, which we'll get to here in a moment on the next slide. But absolutely, I think you've got those tools available to you. The question is, how much can you devote to kind of, working with them and getting familiar with them. Another quick question from the audience, since we were talking about contracting, is, are there any particular AI contracting tools that you recommend? I don't have any particular to recommend. I don't know if either of the two of you do, but there are plenty of them out there.
I think the important thing is to understand what you're trying to achieve and select a tool at least that are going to meet the first top 3 of your criteria, because it's like my old CTO, Alex, it's a crawl, walk, run. So as you're implementing technology, you want to make sure that you are selecting a tool that's really going to solve the business use cases that are necessary in that first years as you gain traction and build out a 5-year plan for maturity.
Absolutely.
Right. So I would echo what was just said and say that when you're looking at technology, it's important that you understand specifically what you want to use it for. So you won't succeed if you go out and just say, I want to use AI for contracts. Okay, for what contracts? For what purpose within the contractual, management, drafting, negotiation context? What do you want to use it for? And then, as TA said, look very specifically at whether the tools you're evaluating can do that out of the box or off the shelf, or what type of investment in terms of customization or personnel time is going to be required to make it do what you want. So those are some of the tips I would advise there.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, recommendations depend on your requirements and what you need to do. So, of course, the other side of the coin is the bad and even ugly risks and challenges associated with generative AI. And I know you probably most of you have heard about hallucinations, and you probably have heard about the lawyer in the Avianca case that submitted a filing with at least 6 bogus cases identified by ChatGPT. And his method of QC was to ask ChatGPT if there were real cases, and that didn't work out so well. Earlier this year, I asked ChatGPT about me, and it told me that I was CEO of an eDiscovery company that doesn't exist, that I wrote several books on eDiscovery that I didn't write, and that I've been teaching eDiscovery courses at Cal Berkeley since 2000, and I've never even set foot on that campus, so I haven't done that either. Certainly another big risk is cybersecurity risk. It's another huge challenge because guess what? Hackers are leveraging generative AI too. So TA, one of the challenges we don't hear enough about is how the Gen AI technology can be integrated within an organization's tech stack. So how important is that, and what do companies need to do to consider when it comes to implementation and integration?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a marriage between your privacy, cybersecurity, compliance, and your legal department anytime you're onboarding something of this kind of magnitude or significance. I also believe that we really need to pivot to understanding and running a year, pilot, so that we can understand with our own data whether that technology solution is actually going to meet that. Some of the considerations of adding it to your tech stack is it going to be behind the firewall and on-prem? Is it in the cloud? And what does that look like? How much data is going to be there? And who in your cybersecurity program is going to be watching over that data for alerts? I mean, a lot of cyber incidents happen generally on-prem, where they've come in some kind of back door. But as many people are going to the cloud, I think you have to start looking at where that risk resides. in the cloud. I think also it's going to be very important to understand your information so you're not in some manual process that is prone to error or just prone to be very time consuming. And by the time you get through that exercise, you're starting that exercise again. So it's going to be very important to add it to your tech stack. And I would say crawl, walk, run, meaning start with a very specific use case with a very specific data set and make sure that that's working before you dump the whole farm in there and want to search across everything.
Yeah, great advice. So Joy, one thing we're seeing is a lot of claims against OpenAI for everything from defamation via hallucinations to copyright infringement, like the example of the Sarah Silverman case. So what potential risks, if any, could an organization open themselves up to by using Gen AI technologies like ChatGPT?
So all of the ones that you just identified and that are in the headlines, the unfortunate cases like the ChatGPT lawyer, as always, potential risk need to be at the forefront of developing your strategy, thinking about what could go wrong. What is the worst case scenario? I think it starts from understanding what data the particular tool is using to create those model outputs and understanding, as always, garbage in means garbage out. So in addition to the claims that you described, potentially creating disinformation, this notion and concept that we're learning more about, the deep fakes, might lead you to make a hiring decision that's based on an applicant's qualifications that aren't accurate. Doug, as it turns out, didn't teach at University of California. Those privacy concerns that Doug mentioned, reputational risk. If you're using outputs that turn out to be inaccurate or could be perceived as biased or discriminatory. An obvious example there is like lending decisions. It can be used to accelerate cyber attacks. You need to check your cybersecurity insurance. What is covered? What types of representations and indemnifications do the tools that you're evaluating and potentially integrating into your tech stack provide you? And how does that look from a potential exposure context and risk liability with claims? Intellectual property, you already mentioned. And then, the overarching regulatory compliance for the industries that the enterprise operates in. So financial services, technology, medical services, and in particular, other heavily regulated industries. You can rest assured that there are going to be special AI-specific rules and regulations that are enacted in these areas, in these industries. And keep in mind also that the existing rules can and have been interpreted and used already for application to AI. So it's not as though this is an open field. You already have regulations in place and ethical rules in place that govern your use of these tools and your organization's use of these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, where ChatGPT is pretty much a worldwide thing, domain-specific LLMs are much more targeted and something that can help, kind of limit some of those risks. So TA, of course, one of the concerns we always hear with any emerging technology is, will I lose my job? And so how real is that concern here with Gen AI technologies, and what should legal professionals do to protect themselves?
Yeah, I'm not on like the lost job hysteria. I feel like tech can basically be leveraged to do those tasks and that analysis at the root level that people really just don't have time to do. And it can free them up for the more critical and specialized assignments that they enjoy, that they went to school with, and what they built their career on. So those underlying sort of tasks and other things that are going on, I think, are easy to move into that space. And then I think it will enhance those skills because somebody's going to have to watch the watcher or vet the information and results that are coming out. And that's going to make us more integrated with our technology and what we are doing as a business and what our data actually really says.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joy, on eDiscovery Today, you recently wrote about leveraging existing skills to become indispensable AI advisors, and you discussed ethical considerations associated with ABA Resolution 112 on AI. So what do you want to tell our audience about that resolution and other resources and considerations regarding the ethics of using AI?
Sure. So it's a pretty wide landscape to the extent that the use of these tools implicate, confidentiality, the way we communicate with our clients, and requires a certain level of technical competence. Several rules of professional conduct may come into play, including Rule 1.1, Comment 8 on technical competency, 1.4, 1.6, 5.3. Those are existing rules that currently govern the use. In 2019, so interestingly, before ChatGPT was on anyone's mind, the ABA issued Resolution 112, which recognizes the ethical and legal issues raised by AI technology and provides guidance in addressing issues like bias, explainability, the transparency of automated decisions or AI outputs, ethical and beneficial usage of AI, controls and oversight of AI, and the vendors that provide AI. And we're going to talk more about that in a little while. It provides specific questions to ask AI vendors. And all of that is detailed in the article that Doug mentioned. I expect that the ABA and other governing bodies will enact AI-specific professional conduct rules, but keep in mind those rules that already apply: Federal Rule 1, Federal Rule 11, which was used to sanction the attorney in the Avianca case, again, Model Rule 5.3. I mentioned several courts that have issued judicial standing orders. You need to keep abreast of those as they relate to proceedings in particular venues where your organization may be operating or litigating. And I wrote an article about that that's in the resource materials. But one quick takeaway on those is that the judicial standing orders in federal court are generally very broad. They're vague. They might require you or your outside counsel to sign affidavits or certifications even on how you used AI in any document filed with the court. Now, query whether and how that includes the use of AI to answer discovery requests and even broad uses and interpretations like that. I expect we will see case law developing, providing guidelines on the use of Gen AI in eDiscovery. Just as we saw case law develop on the appropriate methodology for existing advanced eDiscovery analytics like TAR, technology-assisted review and continuous active learning. So you'll see many providers offering CLE in the coming months on these issues from an ethical perspective. There's also an opportunity for the legal department to provide internal training, as TA mentioned, and to frame that in a way that can provide an opportunity for dialogue with the business on these issues. So think about taking advantage of those opportunities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting some great questions, so hang on there. We will certainly get to those questions here in a bit, but we do want to kind of get through the rest of the slides here. Back to the good and potential use cases for generative AI technology for corporate legal departments. And here are examples of some of the use cases that are out there. And we say current and emerging, but every use case on this list is associated with solutions that are either currently available for use in production today or at least in a beta pilot mode. These aren't use cases that are they're speculative. There's solutions out there today for them. So certainly, Joy, we've already talked a bit about contract management as a use case and everything associated with it, from generating contracts to analysis to lifecycle management. So can you talk a little bit more about how organizations can apply Gen AI capabilities to contract management?
Sure. So, as you just said, we've had the software to automate those processes for a while now. Gen AI will be used to enhance and expand those existing capabilities in this space as a further cost-reducing mechanism. I am technology agnostic, but I do suggest if people are looking for things to check out, a company called Casetext has a technology called CoCounsel. It was recently purchased by Thomson Reuters for a large sum of money, and that analyzes in the context of contracting. It can analyze compliance with your company's policies like indemnification, assignability. And what you can do is you can input various contracting policies, and the technology will find contracts in your portfolio or language in proposed contracts that doesn't comply with those policies. So obviously that has some benefits. I expect Gen AI will be used to synthesize data across divisions and help companies better leverage their buying power and improve their relationships with vendors and distributors. I think it'll be used to help negotiate better pricing and rates for products and services based on more complex analysis of industry and historical data. And I think it'll be used to better and more quickly identify opportunities to do things like exercising options for rebates and discounts, finding contract leakage, and alerting to things like termination and extension deadlines.
Yeah, absolutely. So TA, one of the challenges many organizations face is that they're so swamped and busy with cases, they're not able to take advantage of lessons learned in previous cases to apply them to future cases. So how can Gen AI help address that challenge?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that we have all these QBRs on technology and other things that are ancillary to the legal field and different departments and business units within an organization. But it's the one area of space that has probably the highest risk, generally the most spend. And we're still sort of, just glad when there's resolution and we've been able to check off that box and move that forward. I think when we're talking about, AI and plugging that in, we're going to be able to see what we don't know and what we haven't been able to analyze, because we're just really not doing any post eDiscovery or post litigation analysis other than the fact that when it comes down to dollars and cents. So like I said before, I think it's going to be really important to see that it could predict and build systems on when you have spikes in different parts of your organization, when you have different spikes in, different entities, who are over those, so that you can either advance that through retraining or revising a policy that's in effect that's causing the problem. And then really getting to something quickly to de-escalate that at the front runner. I don't think that we have so many relationships with the attorneys that represent us and their work, but we're really not looking at it from a critical analysis. And then can we use that information to overlay into other things to basically alleviate some of that work in the future so that we can free up time for that kind of analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important, and sometimes just don't seem to have enough time to apply those things. So speaking of eDiscovery, Joy, you've already mentioned TAR, and the ability to leverage AI for discovery isn't new, because TAR has been court approved, as you mentioned, for over a decade, but many organizations still aren't using it. So will the popularity of Gen AI get more organizations to consider leveraging AI for eDiscovery, and how will the emergence of Gen AI change the landscape of AI offerings from eDiscovery providers?
So yes, it will increase the usage and accessibility. There's several reasons organizations aren't currently using existing advanced eDiscovery analytics, and they include, like, the obvious ones are cost, the complexity of those tools. It requires, specialized training. There's a common perception that these tools are most effective when analyzing, huge volumes of data. So to the extent companies don't have serial litigation or the types of disputes that require the analysis of millions of documents, some rightfully haven't seen the need to engage in that. So to the extent Gen AI might lower or eliminate many of the usage barriers and make these analytical tools more accessible or attractive to legal users, usage will increase. In the same way that, ChatGPT eliminated barriers for the general public to leverage that technology. New users, I think, will consider it to the extent it can be shown that it reduces cost. Some of the ways that it will do that in the near term are in the technology's, more robust ability to bulk categorize, better summarize data. Again, as I mentioned, better ECA, better at identifying documents and things like internal investigation scenarios. Doug, you've written about the significance of metadata in authenticating evidence in this age of deep fakes, and makes it more easy to sort of fake or evidence. So the authentication issue, I think eDiscovery software will be leveraged for those types of needs. Gen AI, on the provider side, will certainly increase the value of eDiscovery offerings, and those companies will be integrating AI-based features or insights. AI is also going to increase revenue from that core business of the software providers, and in addition, services surrounding AI will be used to create new business opportunities or revenue sources for eDiscovery providers.
Yeah, absolutely. And appreciate the reference to the article. Certainly, I feel like forensic analysis and metadata analysis are going to be much more important than they ever have been because of the potential of deepfakes and what some are calling the deepfake defense, where people are challenging legitimate evidence, claiming it's deepfake. So certainly a consideration there. So TA, one of the items on this list is legal ops, and the Clock Core 12 model includes firm and vendor management as one of the 12 functional areas for legal ops to manage. So how can Gen AI help with evaluating and managing outside counsel firms and vendors?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I really think that, people have to have a clear understanding of not only their processes, but what they need and what the bottom line happens to be. I think for vendors, you are on demos, they give you all the bells and whistles, but do you need all those bells and whistles? And are they actually functional? Or are you going to onboard a product, spend 2 or 3 years of it stalling until you get the contract signed? And then by the time you stand up and implement the technology, you realize that it doesn't meet your top 3 or 4 or 5 use cases that you want to push over the line. So I think in that type of evaluation, I think you need to be very selective on kicking the tires. And we don't do enough of that and really vetting a solution. I think also we really need to start looking at our outside counsel, spend. And that's the big topic for any GC or any CLO is what is the length of the case? How are those firms operating for this? What are the complexities of that litigation? Are we using, like Joy was talking about, are we using AI and data sets to streamline searches from one case with the same type of claims with a few tweaks along the way? So I think that the most important is what don't we know? What assumptions are we making? And to be able to, for the first time, to really be looking at real data in a dashboard that tells us what we need to know to make strategic decisions moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, how do we get started? There's several considerations. You see a few of them here, and they encompass steps both before and during potential implementation of Gen AI technology. So TA, it seems everybody these days is promoting a Gen AI offering, and it can be difficult to differentiate the choices. So what should people do to look for when researching vendors to help decide which offerings merit further evaluation?
Get out of the sandbox. Because when you're using their data sets, they've specifically targeted those for success. So if you want a real sandbox, you stand it up, you get with your data and your cybersecurity specialists, and you launch a small pilot pointed at 1 or 2 of the top business use cases that you want to onboard that technology. And you use your own data to really understand whether that solution is going to fix. I think you can get the high level of, these are the companies, this is what their technology does, and see whether those match up for an initial sort of broad brush look at. But at the end of the day, besides, testing out their sandbox, looking at it and kicking around the tires, is that you need a small implementation behind the firewall or in the cloud that's plugged into real data to know whether or not it's going to be beneficial for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Since you mentioned pilot programs and you talked about it during our prep call, I'll just throw this question out to you now. Since there's an item on here that says paid pilot programs, what are those and how do they differentiate from a traditional pilot program?
Yeah, typically vendors will stand up, 30 to 90-day pilot where it's in their cloud and you're going to use their data and you're going to just work through the process and workflow that you may do if you chose that technology. A paid pilot is where you get all the resources and you have your compliance people, you have your privacy people, you have legal review it, you have cybersecurity investigate it and know where your data is going to be and how the implementation, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's totally in the cloud or it's behind prem. And then you run that pilot for a year. Sometimes it's 6 months, but a full pilot for a year, and you pay a certain cost. Is it $50K? Is it $75K? And then you can make some determinations from there. You also can determine whether or not that functionality is going to work, because someone can say it does A, but it does do A, but not the type of A that you really want it to do. So I think those are some of the considerations of the paid pilot, is that you're compensating the vendor for the resources and the investment of their time. And you're having an ability to really evaluate the technology and whether or not it will work for you, so that you don't onboard something and you're stuck in a 3-year contract where everybody hates the application, the communication message, no matter how much you made it colorful and pleasant to people, sucks. And then you're looking for another vendor in year 2.
Right. Yeah. Great advice. So Joy, we previously talked about data hygiene, of course, and getting your data house in order. But another important consideration is the stakeholders involved. So what recommendations do you have for getting stakeholder groups involved and getting them to buy into adoption of new technologies like Gen AI?
Right. So it's very important not to undertake these AI business strategy sessions in a vacuum. This is definitely not a sprint. It's a marathon. The impact of AI on business and on society is going to evolve and I think unfold over time. So recommend that legal departments designate key people to stay involved in these efforts, and they can form institutional knowledge of how this technology can be used over the long term. From a business perspective, I think legal departments have an important role to coordinate these strategies because, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, they see the big picture on the business unit, the product line that eager to leverage AI in a particular way isn't necessarily thinking about the regulatory implications of doing that or how their plan will impact IT or how it could affect another aspect of the business. So it's critical that legal has a seat at that table and you engage others to come sit at the table. As TA was saying, by positioning yourselves as trusted business advisors who understand the big picture and who have specific use cases where you can demonstrate these are the ways that it's going to help you in the business sense. So many larger organizations are standing up or have already stood up AI committees, standing committees, or committees to focus on the beta testing, on the paid pilots and other demos and evaluations that TA talked about. This approach also applies to smaller organizations, but you just scale it back. So you might not need a committee, but someone in your legal department, or if you are the lawyer for the organization, you need to be involved in that, and also to be advising executive management on what's going on, both in the regulatory sense and with respect to competitive intelligence and what competitors are doing in the industry with these types of tools, so they understand that and how that feeds into the overall strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And another item, of course, future-proofing. Tech evolves quickly. Gen AI evolves really quickly. So what should corporate legal departments consider when selecting a solution to ensure it's future-proofed as much as possible from a scale and adaptability standpoint?
Yeah, so I think TA has already touched on a lot of it. My broad advice is don't get locked into a long-term solution or a long-term contractual commitment at this point. Things are moving too quickly. You don't want to be tied to anything too closely. Keep in mind the market is it's already exploding with companies offering, AI solutions. You can't buy everything, and you need to become an educated consumer. Keep in mind that many of your existing vendors are going to be offering AI functionality or enhancements in products and software you're already purchasing. So you need to keep that in mind from a budgeting standpoint, and also from a negotiating posture as these renewals come up, as to how and whether you're going to want to align yourselves with the functionality that your existing providers are offering. So those are a few of the considerations.
Yeah,
I just like to tag on to a couple of those things. Whenever you're writing your contract, you need a clause for acquisition, because there's a lot of acquisitions that are going on, and you may or may not want to go with the acquiring company, and this gives you sort of an out. I'd also be consistently on every QBR, every quarter, looking at their roadmap and what they've been able to achieve and what they promised and they underdelivered. How much resources are they putting in there? Because, as we've talked about, these are consistently changing, and you need to make sure that you protect your organization as that technology is evolving.
Right. Yeah. Great point. Companies, they report on their roadmap. They don't always report as well on how well they do on their roadmap. So, and delivering what they promise. So, great points. As I mentioned, a ton of resources. I'm not going to go through them here. I'll just kind of advance through the slides so you can see what we have here. What we tried to do is really provide, in addition to the discussion we're having here, a bunch of resources you can check out on your own, including the AI tool infographic, which is pretty interesting. And keep in mind, these are general AI tools, not industry specific or legal specific. Obviously, shameless plug warning, I'll mention our AI archive with tons of blog posts and a few selected posts here, including some from Joy there to check out. And, you can also subscribe to eDiscovery today to get any new posts we write about AI and legal technology, which also gets you free reports, including the annual eDiscovery State of the Industry report, and a bunch of others. ABA resolutions, Joy mentioned 112, and here's a couple of others to note. The MIT Task Force on Responsible Use of Generative AI for Law, with their 7 considerations there, and a link to the resource there. Policies and laws, both from a state, federal, and international aspect. Publications and articles. The first 2 there are very in-depth and very useful. And Legal Tech News has a running compilation of their articles that you can check out. And then, of course, a whole bunch of stuff on OpenAI and ChatGPT, the good and the bad, as you can see with some of the links here, and 2 slides of that. This was a kind of a biased example from a few years ago where basically over a 16-hour period, the chatbot Microsoft Tay that Microsoft introduced went from saying humans are super cool to Hitler was right, and they had to pull the plug after 16 hours of training by Twitter trolls. So it really illustrates how AI how bias can derail an AI algorithm. And then finally, a terrific article on 7 questions to ask vendors about their AI products, which is great information, and a link to the article there. So let's get to some of the questions we haven't gotten to so far. I'll ask this question. Do you think it is practically possible to regulate the market and force every AI company to create watermarks / special tags and text indicating that the content was created by AI? I have a thought, but I'll open it up to the 2 of you first.
No.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Not anytime soon, at least. It's kind of the Wild West, isn't it? So yes, unfortunately, we'd like to see that. Maybe we'll get to a point where we'll have some regulations at some level, but I'm not sure I'm seeing that anytime soon. So definitely a great question there. Another question is, do you have any recommendations on an audit process for AI or LLM applications? Which, great question. And I actually have seen a couple of resources. I don't think I included them in the slides here, but certainly will have to take a look and see if I can provide those to the in a follow-up email to folks to look for that. But I'll open it up to the two of you. Do you have any recommendations?
I think it depends on the process and what you're using the AI for. And I think there are some specific articles within the LinkedIn community that have come out, but maybe we can use that as a follow-up after the presentation, unless Joy wants to take that question as well.
Yeah, so I agree with you both. It's evolving, and there are some existing resources. I would look to various industry source resources as well. And then with respect to how it's being used within legal specifically, the ABA resolution and some of the guidance we're going to be seeing coming out of the ABA task force will focus, I expect, on explainability, transparency, and the ability to reference back to the sources that create the model output. So those same types of concerns that courts have about the judicial integrity process that were behind a lot of the guidelines and case law that evolved out of TAR and CAL will be similar in this realm, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, I believe I've seen a couple of resources out there for some guidance on AI audits. I think Maura Grossman may have been involved in one of those publications. So I'll have to look and see if I can provide a link to that. And then also a question, will the next generation legal department need to carefully separate generative AI and proprietary AI systems? Comments on that?
No. It's going to, I don't think it's practical. I think that as this technology evolves, you're going to see more applications and technology that provide guardrails to protect proprietary information and that are using smaller, more customized LLMs to help guard against some of those concerns about intellectual property and proprietary information.
But bias can be injected depending on what's going in and going out, whether it's a proprietary, AI function or whether you're plugging in generative AI and you're leveraging other sort of systems. So it's just a note for that.
Indeed. We are a minute past time, but I'll open it up to the two of you for one quick last minute tip on kind of addressing the Gen AI challenge today.
Yeah, I think you need to make friends for people who are a lot smarter than myself and other people, and really start following and building those relationships. I don't do business, or organizations that I represent don't do business with people we don't trust. And with the evolving of AI or generative AI or anything like that, you need somebody who can come to you that says there's a problem with the AI algorithm, or there's something wrong with the way the information was inputted, and we've corrected this, and this is what it impacts.
Yeah, I would say, I would just say start small, stay informed, don't be afraid.
Okay, very good. And I'll just add, there's a saying, sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. AI is the windshield, it's coming down the road. And whether you're the bug or not depends on how you address it, and staying informed is key, and keeping yourself educated is key. You can be proactive and cautious at the same time. So just kind of continue to keep educating yourself and try to read as much as you can and attend webinars like this. So with that, I want to thank Joy and TA for all your excellent insights. I want to thank CCBJ for hosting this webinar, and I want to thank all of you for attending and the great questions too. So we'll see you next time on the CCBJ network. Bye, everybody.